Yo, what's up? My name's RetroPat, and welcome to Dungeon Defenders, what I believe to be the most underrated game of all time. And I understand your skepticism if you hear someone online saying that with a very small YouTube channel, but I implore you to give this game a try, and I hope that this video aids your journey. Dungeon Defenders is a fantastic game for new players to pick up, explore, and experience the main campaign, but there's also thousands and thousands of hours of endgame content if you want to get to that point as well. You can truly play Dungeon Defenders to whatever experience you want to have on it. But because this game can be so deep, I hope that these tips here today will help you explore and learn a lot about the game and have a lot of fun in whichever way you want to take it. Now, quickly, I do want to preface that I'm not the best Dungeon Defenders players by any mean. I've actually been rediscovering the game over the past couple months or so and having a lot of fun with it. I started playing the game in 2011 on the Xbox 360, and if you're someone like me, played the game back on console and you're coming over to the PC port years later, it's a totally different game. There is so much more depth to it. There's so much more complications. There's so many things you can do on PC you couldn't do on console, and I can't recommend you enough. If you love this game on console, you'll love it on the PC port, and things have changed, and I recommend getting all of the DLCs. There is so much to explore. Or maybe you're just playing Dungeon Defenders for the first time in your entire life in the year 2023 or even 2024 or maybe even 2025 and beyond. And if that's you, I hope that everybody finds some sort of value and help from this video. Timestamps will be on the video, of course, as always, to help you navigate and jump around to whatever tips you're interested in. With that point in mind, let's go ahead and jump into tip number one. The number one Dungeon Defenders tips that I tell everybody as soon as they start playing is to make sure you play online and play ranked. I know this seems weird, I know this seems strange, but the reason is your online ranked heroes are actually separate from your local heroes. So if you start playing locally and then you want to switch to online, you're not going to be able to transfer over those heroes. The reason being is because the online ranked system really kind of checks out for and keeps an eye on hacking and kind of breaks down all of that versus you could hack if you wanted to in local play. So for anything to be legit, you do have to play in the online ranked mode, and for you to achieve things like achievements in the game, if you care about achievement hunting on Steam and such, then you want to play in the online ranked mode. Pretty much everybody should play in the online ranked mode every time. There's almost no reason to play on local play unless you don't really have internet all the time and really want to kind of be able to play offline. Then that's maybe the one situation, but I really recommend just playing online ranked mode. And what I do, not always the most social person. You want to go to private match, you can always just sort of hide in your own tavern. Just because you're playing online doesn't mean you actually have to play with other people. Tip number two is that multi-boxing is so unbelievably beneficial in Dungeon Defenders. If you press the F3 key, it will spawn in another hero that you can go ahead and select and equip. If you press the F4 key, it will spawn in a third hero. And then if you press the F5 key, you can spawn in up to 4 heroes at once. You can go ahead and have 4 different characters being played at the same time. Now, to switch among these characters once you actually have them pulled up, if you press F2, it will return to your main character. F3 is going to be the next, and then F4, the same keys that it took to spawn them, is going to what allows you to sort of switch between them. You can also press F6 to do some certain things, and certain F7 is going to collapse all of them. And then if you have some heroes up like such, you can actually F6, I think, might spawn in all 4 at the same time. It's going to bring all these heroes up. If you have all of them up, you can actually press F8, have all the heroes active. They're not collapsed. Have all of them up, but just be big screened on your main character that you hear about or care about, which allows you to sort of have these characters in the game, be gaining XP on whatever map you want to play, making it more difficult, keep in mind, but also just playing the game normally with your one big screen. You don't always want to have all that complicated mess of, 4, UIs all on the screen at one point. Learning the UI and F keys and everything of the sort with the emulator in-game is kind of complicated. I misclick all the time. It just happens. It may take a while to learn. Tip number 3 is that the level scaling is similar to RuneScape. And what I mean by that is that levels 1 to 70 have a pretty decent fast pace. I know if you're new, it may not seem like it, but they actually do. And then at level 71, the XP formula changes. The amount of XP needed per level drastically increases. You get another slowdown XP rate change as well at level 80, and you actually need the same amount of XP. Levels 99 to level 100, you require 92 million XP, which is the same exact amount of XP that could get you all the way from level 1 to 79. So it's a pretty insane difference in scaling. Thankfully, the stronger you get, the more difficult levels you can complete, so the more XP you get, so it shouldn't be as hard as it sounds on paper, but also prepare yourself for a pretty proper grind if you're going for level 100. Tip number 4 is that items on the ground left at the beginning of a wave get turned into mana. You don't just lose them forever, so when they poof away, don't stress out. I remember when I first started playing Dungeon Defenders, I was just picking up everything because I didn't want it to just go to waste. But if I press G here and go ahead and start the wave, you'll see these items disappear. And in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you can see 653 mana was added to my mana bank, so those items were converted into mana. Tip number 5 is that if you play survival, that game mode, you can actually continue from the previous wave that you actually either got to or lost at. So you can see I can bring my starting wave all the way up to wave 24 on Deeper Well since I've completed this map to wave 25. So I can go ahead and just start at wave 20 and then collect the chest, and it'll actually give me a ton of mana to give me a little bit of a head start on this wave. Now, if you haven't gotten to this wave, you can't do this, and if you start at the max wave in survival that you can at the beginning, like wave 8, you won't get the mana boost. So it's best just to start to wave 1 and then work your way up, but you can always recontinue if you lose later into a survival run. This feature does not exist on console, which is one of the really big changes from console over to PC. Keep in mind, if you continue from wave 24, you may not get certain rewards by actually completing wave 25. So for example, on Deeper Well, if you start at wave 24, complete wave 24 and 25, you will not be rewarded the Nessie pet, which is the big purple monster blob I have here. But if you start at wave 23, beat 23, 24, and 25, you will get that reward. Tip number 6 is that you get a full set bonus for wearing the same type of armor. Now, this may not matter for a lot of the early game, but if you can do it, it's worth doing. And if you want to look for that towards mid to late game, it definitely becomes way more viable. You can tell you have the full set bonus when everything is lit up blue like this. The reason I have the full set bonus is because I have full pristine armor. Now, there are a couple different armor types which you can go ahead and go over to my item box and talk about. Or I guess the Dungeon Defenders wiki itself is probably a better place to show you. So there is leather armor, mail armor, chain armor, plate armor, and pristine armor, and they all look like this as you can see on screen. They all have very different little pictures and icons to keep track of them. They also should say on the name of the armor itself. So for example, when I click on my armor, I can see that it's enchanted pristine armor. There's a lot of different adjectives in the way, but it should say what kind of armor it is. Now, having a full set of that armor gives you around a 25% at least bonus. I think mine's around 30%. It depends on the tier of armor. Since my armor is mythical armor, I do get a slight bump up in the bonus itself, and the wiki has a good breakdown of that. But let's go ahead, and if I were to drop this piece of armor, you'll see all the blue colors go away. The blue on the numbers go away, and now you can see my stats have dropped dramatically. Not just from me unequipping that piece of armor, but also from me losing the set bonus. And then if I re-equip it, I gain the blue stats again and a ton of numbers on top of it. There's a lot of hidden little numbers and statistics and math like that in Dungeon Defenders that I try to always spread as information. And I'm really thankful and grateful to all of my viewers who have been teaching me this stuff over the past couple months. I've only learned this because of a lot of incredible viewers like yourself. And hopefully I can use my micro platform to spread even more of that information. And for tip number 7, I think it's super important to know that there are 2 end of wave bonuses. Watch the bottom right hand corner of my screen here as I go ahead and complete this wave. I'm going to receive 30% more XP for no core damage and 30% more XP for no player damage. So if you can avoid not taking any damage to your player character and your core, aka the big gem back there, you'll get up to 60% more increased XP. It's a pretty big difference, and it's important to keep an eye on that if possible. Tip number 8 is that setting your own goals is really important in Dungeon Defenders. If you run out of goals, you're going to run out of things you could do and possibly get bored. But if you set goals, you could play for thousands of hours and never get bored. I recommend going through the wiki, learning about certain pets or pieces of gear you want to collect, or which heroes you want to level to 70 or even maybe up to level 100. I do have 2 episodes in my Dungeon Defenders series going over making these goals as well. I recommend I just have a notepad document. You could do whatever you want to keep track of these goals. Tip number 10 is a pretty simple one. You can go ahead and make folders if you would like to actually track your gear a bit better within your item storage if you want to drag stuff over to it or keep things a little more sorted. You can also collapse those folders and bring them back all to your main page. You can have folders within your folders. You can rename your folders. It's just good for storage and organization. Tip number 11 is that once you get one character to level 70 or so, power leveling all of your other characters is going to become so much easier. Using maps like Glitterhelm Caverns on hard or insane difficulty, power boosting and leveling other heroes for the harder maps down the road becomes a necessity. Having a high level monk, having a high level summoner for different maps that may need them. The first hero is always going to be your most difficult to level, but also arguably one of the most fun. So it's important to keep that in mind if you're dredging the idea of leveling up more characters after leveling your first to level 70 or so. The others will be much, much easier. Tip number 12 is about checking the Tavern Keep. He constantly has cycling items that may be worth to check over, whether it's pets or weapons or armor or whatever gear you may need. It's at least worth checking really quick to see if it's a good upgrade for you. Especially pets early game. I think getting access to stronger and better pets in that early to mid game is going to be really, really helpful. Tip number 13 is that the Tavern Keep also has something called an XP bonus, which you can pay 70,000 mana for a percentage of XP for that level. Now you can only do it once per level, so I switched characters to show you guys. I'm going to go ahead and click it, pay 70,000 mana, and get 472k XP. That's a lot of XP for that amount of mana. It's usually a pretty good trade, especially later on. Don't be afraid to spend your mana on these XP bonuses. It can really speed up your progress, and time is money, aka mana. Here's an interesting one. Tip number 14 is that your character's speed stat essentially caps out at 100. So make sure not to waste skill points by going over that number at whatever point in the game. Also, it may be important to, if you want to put points into your speed in the early to mid game, it can be really helpful and allow you to get through some more levels. But once you reach mythical armor, a lot of those pieces of gear are going to give you excess speed. So I have 245 speed just coming from my equipment. So it may be worth later on. I have 12 wasted stat points in my speed. It may be worth to go ahead and go respec your hero, which we'll cover here in a bit. And by in a bit, I literally mean the next tip. Tip number 15 is if you've already made this mistake, like on my Squire here, I don't need these 12 stats. They can go somewhere else. You can talk to the Tavern Keep, pay 100,000 mana to respec your hero, allowing yourself to reallocate your stat points. I didn't write a tip for this one, but if you want to rename your hero for 50k mana, you can also do that. Now, tip number 16 is if you're respecing your hero or just need to allocate points super quickly, you can use shift click or control click to distribute different number of points. So if you click shift click, you'll go ahead and add +5 levels into one thing at one time. But if you control click, you're going to add 100 stats, spending 100 points all at one point. These clicks can also be used, if I'm not mistaken, for like pro mode and upgrading your gear. But right now, I'm just showing you guys these for upgrading your, levels. Since I'm respecting my hero anyway, I might as well show you guys what that looks like. So shift click is +5, and then control click is plus a whopping 100. Let's go ahead and keep spending these points, and I'll see you guys for tip number 17. Tip number 17 is that challenge missions and survival maps are going to get you much less experience than just completing the normal campaign missions. Especially since completing those waves and getting that 30% XP reward at the end of each wave is going to be a huge part of your XP gain. Don't get trapped into the idea that grinding survival is good for XP since it takes a long period of time. Now, I love survival mode, so I definitely recommend checking it out for fun, but it's not going to be your best option for XP. Tip number 18 is that different drops of the same piece of gear can have different stats, especially based on which difficulty you're playing the map on, and the higher difficulty obviously results in better gear, but there is some RNG involved as well, which results in the grinding of gear for the best stuff. So you can see these two giraffe on a treadmills. These were both achieved by completing an easy difficulty survival map to be able to wave 25 to get them, but both of them have pretty different stats. One can be leveled up to 60, one can be leveled up to 73. One has a lot more HP on the hero. One has more tower stats. There's just a lot of RNG involved. One is just a better giraffe on a treadmill being around 35k versus this one being 27k. You may end up going for the same pet or piece of gear multiple times to get better rolls on those stats or more levels to be allowed to upgrade into that gear. Tip number 19 is that you can level up your gear by spending mana, but only a set amount of times that you can level up your actual gear, which is always different. The amount of times you can level up depends on the quality of gear, depends on what stage of the game you're in, and the mana cost per level also depends on the quality of the gear and how many levels it has into it. Similar to the stat RNG rolls, there's also RNG rolls on how many times you can level up a specific piece of equipment, and these elements of RNG and rewards based on difficulty create for some extremely unique pieces of equipment. So here I have this mythical electric pirate's saber, very long, complicated name. I can go ahead and click this button to slowly hold and invest XP, as you can see the bar going up, or I can invest all, complete that level, and go ahead and give myself a little stat boost. And you can see it cost 3,000 mana for the first level, but now it costs 10k for the second level. And then if I go pro mode, I can go ahead and just click away, and I'm going to give this thing tons of different stat increases, but spending a lot of mana very, very quickly. Tip number 20 is that pets are super important and give you a huge statistical bonus in mid to early and even late game. It's also important to note that in the PC port, pets get free experience essentially. So if you just play alongside a pet and upgrade and use your towers, some of that XP will also be funneled into them. So I didn't actually pay for this upgrade. I'm gonna go ahead and use it, and I'll probably have another one. Do you see? I get free XP. This pet gets free levels just because I've been playing with it in the game. So make sure to always take advantage of that free XP, and make sure to remember to actually level up your pets. Tip number 21 is that playing in hardcore mode, this little checkbox here, makes it so that your hero doesn't respawn in the combat wave if it were to die. But this mode also gives you a huge boost on experience and the quality of loot. So it's important to always play in this mode if you feel like you're up to it and able to take it on without dying. But if you think you may pass away or take an L or take a death in the combat wave, you may not want to do this, because then you'll end up stuck, unable to beat the level, unable to complete the wave, and just watch as your core gets destroyed. In short, hardcore mode is super, super powerful at increasing your progression, but only use it if you know you can abuse it. Tip number 22 is that when you press tab on the map, you can see a lot of things. So let's first break them down one by one. The main thing I want to talk about here is the quality of item drops on the ground. So you can see over in that left corner, you can see mythical 10, godly 1. That's the different tiers of quality of gear that's actually been dropped on the ground right now. If I collect this chest, it should go up. So now I got 4 mythicals from this chest. That's very good. Now your list is going to look very, very different from mine on this map, and the highest tier of gear should be at the top of the list, and the lowest quality of gear should be at the bottom. It's good to keep an eye out for higher tiers of gear when you're first getting into the game. Keep an eye out for godly, legendary, or stuff like that. Now, when you also press tab, you get to see your own towers, you get to see your crystal HP, and you get to see incoming enemies in real time. It's super powerful. You'll see me pressing tab all the time in my Dungeon Defenders playthrough. Speaking of a Dungeon Defenders playthrough, I have a full playthrough on my channel from episodes 0 to 60 or so at the time of recording, and it's really a way for me to show you guys my re-experiencing of the game and learning everything from scratch again. So if you want to see a Dungeon Defender experience and the progression that you may want to take, I definitely recommend checking out that series. Now, tip number 23 is that accidentally pressing the O button is going to hide the minion info about them coming in. Make sure not to do this. Only a buffoon would do this, and I definitely didn't do this throughout my Dungeon Defenders playthrough and then had the information off for many episodes. Make sure that if you accidentally make this mistake, like some buffoons, like possibly myself, make sure to press the O key again. O key is what turns it on and off. That information is important. I guess if you want a super aesthetic screenshot, you can do that, but usually you just press H for that and then press Q, and that's going to give you these cinematic shots that I use. Tip number 24 is an opinion from personal experience, but in my opinion, I think that wyverns are the mob that kills most new players' early maps runs. Now, the wyverns are flying enemies that come from specific direction. They really start becoming an issue on maps like this, Magus Quarters. They're just flying enemies that come from weird spawns that you kind of just have to learn. There's not really a great way to always know where the wyverns are coming from unless you've actually seen them come from that location, unlike other mobs where you can obviously see they're coming from the doors with the purple dated areas, etc., etc. Wyverns are a little trickier. You kind of have to just learn them in due time. On Magus Quarters, for example, there's these two little corners over here in this top section, that corner and this corner, and the wyverns will just sort of fly out of there. It's not really shown exactly, but you'll see the wyverns will almost fly out of the doors themselves, but they'll kind of just come from over in these corner directions, and you've got to keep an eye out for them. Keeping an eye out where wyverns are coming from is going to be a great way to learn how to survive in a lot of different waves. Tip number 25 is about switching between heroes and carrying the mana. So let's say, for example, I want to go ahead and build harpoon towers all around, but I also want to switch over to my monk. Now, if I collected all this mana on my squire and I switch to my monk and I've collected all the chests and, oh, I have 0 mana. How am I going to build anything? Let's say I have no chests on the map right now. But if I swap back to my squire, I have the mana on him. If I press M, it's going to insta drop all my mana. I can switch over to my monk. I can pick up the mana on my monk and then go build whatever towers I would like to. So quickly pressing the M key and switching over to whatever hero you want to be on is super good hotkey memory. If you collect all the mana on the map and then switch over to a different hero, you'll be in a sticky situation if you don't drop that mana. Now, my next tip is really going to be about don't be afraid to spend mana to level up gear. That's something that I struggle with, but it's important to understand that Dungeon Defenders does a very good job of scaling how much mana you gain at different points in the game. So it honestly is just worth to dump mana into leveling up gear. And just try not to hoard that mana like Smog hoarding gold. I know that's kind of an issue that I have, and some people just can't help it, but you do actually want to use those resources. Once you reach things like Endless Spires, Nightmare difficulty, you'll be making so much mana. I actually did a video going over my loot from 1 hour of it, and I made around, I think, 300+ million mana per hour. So if you spend a ton of mana in the early game and you regret it, don't worry. Once you get to later game or mid game, you'll be able to recoup all that mana you spent so quickly. Tip number 27 is that training dummies are your friend. It can be difficult to understand what combination of stats actually equates to the most amount of DPS. So testing on training dummies in the tavern is one of your best ways to make sure you know what is the actual best combination. How do I know what amount of defense attack rate plus defense based damage actually makes for the best DPS? You kind of just have to test or do a bunch of really good research. Tip number 28 is that one of the coolest rewards in all of Dungeon Defenders, hell, even all of video games, is the secret room up on the catwalk in the main room of the tavern. This room is unlocked once you complete the storyline of Dungeon Defenders, and I don't want to show off too much of it, but it's just filled with incredible things. It's filled with references and puns, an HD TV to spy on the rest of the tavern if you have other players playing. There's tons of Mountain Dew, what is juice. And the first time you enter this secret area and open this secret stash, you'll be rewarded with a ton of mana and also exclusive items like Dad's Spear, Dad's Staff, and Mom's Bow somewhere else in here if I'm not mistaken. These item rewards aren't very strong, but they are a really cool collectible in my opinion. Also, you can check out some of the pets in the game like the kobold on a treadmill, giraffe on a treadmill, and treadmill on a treadmill. Not to mention, this game had one of the craziest Easter eggs being this QR code hidden behind the secret stash. Now, to my understanding, I don't think much ever came of this QR code. I don't know if it actually ever worked at any time, but it's just freaky to say the least. Probably one of the coolest rooms in all of gaming, and it's just such a cool thing to explore and get as a great reward for completing the game on the main storyline. Tip number 29 is that if you play a combat wave without the hero that built the towers that are active, these towers will actually do around 30% less damage and just be 30% less effective. So we can see here on my squire, I'm doing 22k damage, but around 22k DPS. But if I were to switch over to my monk and then have that tower continuously doing damage, look, now it's only doing 7,000 per shot. Let's not get my pet involved. Now it's doing around 19,000, probably less, 18,000 or so DPS. The DPS has dropped a fair bit, a couple thousand. Now, sometimes this is still worth it since starting a combat wave with more players does scale up the mob's HP and quantity, so make your decisions wisely based around what you're looking for. Now, tip number 30, I mentioned this lightly earlier, but Glitterhelm Cavern runs on hard/insane difficulty are going to be some of the best XP you can get up until around level 74. So you'll be spending a ton of time on this map, and I do have a guide breaking down the good strategy for this and a loop from 1 hour on my channel, hopefully by the time this video comes out. And then tip 31, once you reach level 74, grinding wave 1 on Nightmare is one of the best ways to farm mythical gear. Guides for both of these tips I just covered for 30 and 31 will be linked in the description, as well as the loop for 1 hour. Tip number 32 is a squire specific tip, since that's my specialty. And it's the fact that harpoons are OP and almost always better than cannonball turrets. The fact that harpoons can pierce through a whole line of enemies is just so good. And cannonball balls can only bounce around 6 times before being destroyed, and they end up being a lot slower and getting caught on staircases a lot. Cannonballs really can only be used when pointing downward and going down a staircase, and then even then, I often go harpoons. It's definitely one of the least balanced aspects of Dungeon Defenders 1 in my opinion. See how a lot of the cannonballs end up getting bounced behind the cannon and just bounced all over the place? They end up being so much less effective than the harpoon arrows. I can see them being really good down a staircase or something. They actually can reach higher DPS numbers, as you can see over around, I think it's 21k or so on the harpoon shots. There's a lot of numbers in the air, and it's 29k or so here over on the cannonball shot, but you're just hitting way less enemies. See how pretty much just this first training dummy is getting hit, but over on the harpoon side, all 5 enemies are getting hit. So is that DPS increase really worth it? Maybe on certain maps, on certain chokes, on certain, things you might need that situation, but I would say usually harpoons are just better. Tip number 33 is that elemental resistances are a really big deal in Dungeon Defenders. As you can see, this archer has a poison damage resistance, so if my sword or weapon did poison damage, I'd be doing significantly less damage to him. Most weapons do some kind of elemental damage, and most mobs will have at least one immunity to one of these elemental damage. Like this guy is immune to poison damage. Now, every sword has an elemental damage and a physical damage. As you can see 1,000 melee damage and around 1,100 fire damages on this hammer. If you know that you have a fire sword, or in this case, like if you know you have a poison based damage weapon, it might be worth to just let this guy go through, let him get killed by your towers, and then go deal with other minions you can better handle. It can be a really huge difference, and sometimes it's just not worth your time. For example, if you can normally 2-shot normal minions without a poison resistance, but your weapon does poison damage, it might take you, instead of 2 shots to kill this guy, it might take you 6 to 8. It's a huge difference. Now that is the final tip for today's videos. That's all the beginner tips that I could think of when it comes to Dungeon Defenders, but I myself am more of just a mid-tier player and I have a lot to learn. However, I hope that these tips were helpful to you today, and if they were, make sure to leave a like on the video to let me know, dislike if not, and subscribe to the channel for daily uploads. I'll see you guys later. Peace, Reno. Have fun playing Dungeon Defenders, and hopefully this was at least a pico bit helpful.